Margaret Chen sat at her kitchen table, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the worn curtains of her small apartment. In front of her lay a collection of coins scattered across an old floral tablecloth. Quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. She'd been collecting them for months now, dropping spare change into a large glass jar whenever she had any left over from her grocery shopping. Her hands, marked with age spots and arthritis, moved slowly as she counted. $23.50, she recounted to make sure. Yes, that was right. She needed $47.83 for her blood pressure medication. The prescription had gone up again last month, and even with her insurance, it was getting harder to manage on her small pension. Margaret had been a school teacher for 37 years. She'd taught second grade at Lincoln Elementary, watching thousands of children learn to read and write. She'd loved every minute of it. But that was a long time ago now. Her husband Robert had passed away 4 years earlier, and the life insurance money had slowly dwindled away with medical bills and everyday expenses. She lived carefully, budgeting every dollar, but sometimes it still wasn't enough. She sighed and started scooping the coins into a small cloth bag with a drawstring. The bag had been a gift from one of her former students probably 30 years ago. It was faded now, but she kept it because it reminded her of better times. She tucked the bag into her purse and grabbed her coat from the hook by the door. The CVS pharmacy was only 3 blocks away. Margaret had stopped driving 2 years ago when her eyesight started failing. She didn't mind walking when the weather was nice, but her knees complained with every step these days. Still, she was grateful she could still get around on her own. She'd seen too many of her friends end up in nursing homes, unable to care for themselves. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Morrison was having the kind of day that made him question his life choices. He'd been working at the CVS for 3 years now, ever since dropping out of community college. It wasn't what he'd imagined for himself, but the pay was okay and the hours were flexible. Today, though, everything seemed to be going wrong. His shift had started at noon, and within the first hour, he'd dealt with a customer screaming about expired coupons, another demanding to speak to a manager about an out-of-stock item, and a third who'd somehow managed to knock over an entire display of vitamins. His manager, Patricia, had been in a mood all day, snapping at everyone about keeping the lines moving faster. Tyler rubbed his temples as he processed another prescription. The line behind the pharmacy counter stretched back into the store. It was always like this on Tuesdays for some reason. Everyone seemed to need their prescriptions filled on Tuesdays. He glanced at the clock. Only 4 more hours until his shift ended. He didn't notice the man who'd just walked into the store. Most people wouldn't have noticed him either. He was dressed simply in jeans, a dark t-shirt, and a worn leather jacket. A baseball cap covered most of his face, and sunglasses hid his eyes. He moved quietly through the aisles, picking up a bottle of vitamins and reading the label with genuine interest. This was how Keanu Reeves preferred to spend his afternoons when he wasn't working. Just being a regular person, doing regular things. He'd learned long ago that if he dressed down and kept a low profile, he could move through the world without too much attention. It was one of the few times he felt truly relaxed. He'd stopped into this particular CVS because he'd been driving by and remembered he needed to pick up some supplements. Nothing fancy, just basic vitamins. He liked this store because it was usually quiet, tucked away in a neighborhood that wasn't too touristy. He could browse without being bothered. Margaret pushed through the glass doors of the pharmacy, the little bell above jingling to announce her arrival. The store was busy, she noticed. The pharmacy line was long. She took her place at the back, gripping her purse tightly. The cloth bag of coins inside suddenly felt heavy. She'd been dreading this all day. She knew how people looked at you when you paid with change. She'd seen it before, the impatience, the eye rolls, the sighs. But what choice did she have? She needed her medication. Without it, her blood pressure would spike, and she couldn't risk another hospital visit. The last one had nearly bankrupted her. Tyler called out, "Next!" a bit more sharply than necessary. An elderly man shuffled forward with his prescription. Tyler processed it mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He was thinking about his rent, which was due in 3 days. He was thinking about his car, which was making a strange noise. He was thinking about how he'd somehow ended up 26 years old and still working retail. The line moved slowly. Margaret shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the pressure on her knees. She watched as Tyler helped customer after customer. He seemed tired, she thought. Worn down. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough. In the vitamin aisle, Keanu had found what he needed. He was in no rush, though. He enjoyed these quiet moments of normalcy. He picked up a bottle of vitamin D, read the label, put it back, picked up another brand. These were the kinds of decisions that grounded him, reminded him that despite everything, he was just a person trying to take care of his health like everyone else. He glanced toward the pharmacy counter, noting the long line. He'd wait until it died down before checking out. No point in adding to the chaos. He moved to the next aisle, browsing aimlessly, appreciating the simple pleasure of having nowhere important to be. Margaret finally reached the front of the line. Tyler looked up at her with an expression that was meant to be professional, but came across as barely tolerant. "Prescription name?" he asked. "Margaret Chen," she said softly. Her voice had gotten quieter with age. Sometimes people had trouble hearing her. Tyler turned to the bins of filled prescriptions, found her bag, and scanned it into the system. $47.83, he said flatly. Margaret nodded. She'd known the price. She opened her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out the cloth bag. She could feel Tyler watching her. She could feel the people behind her in line watching too. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. She loosened the drawstring and the coins clinked together with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Tyler's expression shifted just slightly, but enough for Margaret to notice. It wasn't quite a frown, but it wasn't neutral either. She began to pour the coins onto the counter, and that's when everything began to change, though she didn't know it yet. Somewhere behind her in the store, Keanu had noticed the commotion at the pharmacy counter. He lowered the bottle of vitamins he'd been examining and turned his attention toward the scene unfolding at the front of the store. He couldn't hear what was being said yet, but something about the body language caught his attention. The way the elderly woman's shoulders were hunched, the way the employee behind the counter had stiffened, the way other customers were starting to look uncomfortable. He took a few steps closer, moving into the neighboring aisle where he could observe without being obvious. Years of fame had taught him to read situations quickly, to sense when something wasn't right. And something about this situation definitely wasn't right. Margaret's hands shook as she started separating the coins into piles. Quarters here, dimes there. She could feel her heart beating faster. She could feel the judgment radiating from Tyler like heat from a stove. She wanted to explain, to tell him that she wasn't trying to be difficult, that this was all she had. But the words stuck in her throat. Tyler glanced at the growing line behind Margaret and felt his frustration building. This was exactly what he didn't need right now. He could already imagine Patricia coming out of her office to see what was taking so long. He could feel the impatience of the other customers. And in that moment, tired and frustrated and not thinking clearly, Tyler made a choice that would change his life forever. He opened his mouth to speak, and the words that came out were ones he would regret for a very long time. Tyler looked at the pile of coins spreading across his counter and felt something snap inside him. It had been building all day, all week really. The frustration, the exhaustion, the feeling of being trapped in a job that was going nowhere. And now this. A customer paying for a $50 prescription with loose change. Really? The word came out before he could stop it. You couldn't get this changed at a bank or something? Margaret's hands froze mid-count. She looked up at Tyler, her eyes wide behind her thick glasses. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at him like she'd been slapped. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I know it's a lot of coins. I'll count faster." But Tyler was already too far gone. The customer behind Margaret had audibly sighed, and somehow that made it worse. It was like permission to keep going. "I mean, there's a line," Tyler said, gesturing behind her. "Other people are waiting. This is going to take forever." Margaret felt heat rising to her face, that familiar burning sensation of shame that she hadn't felt since she was a child. She'd been so careful to avoid this feeling her entire adult life. She'd worked hard, been independent, never asked anyone for help. And now here she was, a 78-year-old woman being scolded like a schoolchild for the crime of being poor. "I'm going as fast as I can," she said, her voice even quieter now. Her hands were shaking worse than before as she tried to sort the coins into neat stacks. A quarter slipped from her arthritic fingers and rolled off the counter, bouncing on the floor with a metallic ping that seemed to echo through the store. Tyler didn't move to help her. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that Margaret knew all too well. Impatience mixed with contempt. The look you give someone when you've decided they're wasting your time. Another coin fell. Then another. Margaret bent down to try to pick them up, her knees screaming in protest. She had to grip the counter to lower herself, and even then, she nearly lost her balance. The coins had rolled under the counter, just out of reach. "Ma'am, maybe you should just pay with a card," Tyler said, making no effort to help her. "This is really holding up the line." "I don't have a card," Margaret said from her half-crouched position. Her voice cracked slightly. "I just have this." She managed to grab one of the quarters and slowly pulled herself back up, using the counter for support. When she stood up straight again, she could see that the line had grown longer. 7 people now, all watching her, some with sympathy but others with obvious irritation. She could hear whispered conversations. "What's taking so long? Are you kidding me? She's paying with coins? I'm going to be late picking up my kids." Tyler heard the complaints too, and instead of feeling bad about the situation he'd created, he felt validated. See, he wasn't the only one who thought this was ridiculous. He picked up a few of the coins Margaret had counted out and pushed them around on the counter with his finger. Not actually counting, just moving them. "Look," he said, his tone dripping with false patience, "I'm just saying, most people manage to get their money sorted before they come to the pharmacy. You know, like responsible adults." Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Responsible adults. As if she hadn't been responsible her entire life. As if she hadn't taught hundreds of children, paid taxes for 40 years, raised a family, cared for a dying husband. As if she'd chosen to end up counting pennies in a pharmacy while a man young enough to be her grandson lectured her about responsibility. "I'm sorry," she said again. Because what else could she say? She went back to counting, her vision blurring with tears she absolutely refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. From his position in the next aisle, Keanu had heard enough. He'd been watching the interaction unfold with growing disbelief. At first, he'd thought maybe he was misunderstanding the situation. Maybe the employee was just trying to be efficient. But no, there was no mistaking what was happening here. This was cruelty, plain and simple. He looked at the elderly woman's trembling hands, at her bowed head, at the way she seemed to be shrinking into herself with each passing second. He looked at the smug expression on the employee's face. He looked at the other customers in line, some uncomfortable, some impatient, but none stepping forward to help. Keanu had a policy about getting involved in situations that didn't concern him. Fame had taught him to be careful about when and where he intervened. People filmed everything these days, and even good intentions could be twisted into something ugly. But there were moments when you couldn't just stand by. Moments when being silent made you complicit. This was one of those moments. Margaret had finally gathered all the fallen coins and was starting her count over. 23, 24, 25. She had to keep track in her head because Tyler hadn't given her a piece of paper to write on. Her fingers sorted through the quarters mechanically. "You know what I don't understand," Tyler continued, apparently unable to help himself, "is why people don't plan better. Like, you need medication. You know it costs money. Why not save up properly instead of bringing in a bag of change like you're at an arcade or something?" A few people in line shifted uncomfortably at that comment. It had crossed a line from impatient to mean. A woman in her 40s, third in line, opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. It wasn't her business, she told herself. She didn't want to make a scene. Margaret's counting faltered. She'd lost track. Was she at $32 or $33? She'd have to start over, again. She could feel panic rising in her throat. Her blood pressure medication, she'd been taking it for 15 years. If she didn't get it today, she'd have to go without, and her doctor had been very clear about what could happen if she missed doses. "I'm sorry," she said for what felt like the 100th time. "I just need to count again. I lost track." Tyler made an exaggerated show of checking his watch. "Of course you did." Behind him, another pharmacy employee, a young woman named Rosa, was filling prescriptions and trying very hard to pretend she wasn't hearing any of this. She'd worked with Tyler for 6 months and knew he could be moody. But this was something else. This was wrong. She wanted to say something, but Tyler was senior to her and she needed this job. She had her own bills to pay. Margaret started counting again from the beginning. 1, 2, 3. The quarters clinked softly as she stacked them. 4, 5, 6. She could hear someone behind her tap their foot impatiently against the floor. 7, 8, 9. Tyler was scrolling through his phone now, not even pretending to pay attention to her. How much longer is this going to take? A man's voice called from the back of the line. "I've got places to be." "Join the club," Tyler muttered, loud enough for Margaret to hear. That's when Keanu stepped out of the aisle. He'd heard enough. He'd seen enough. He moved purposefully toward the pharmacy counter, his jaw set in a way that people who knew him well would recognize as a sign that he was genuinely angry. Not the explosive kind of anger that made you yell and throw things. The quiet kind that burned steady and made you act. He was still wearing his baseball cap and sunglasses, but something about his presence made people notice him. The way he carried himself, the deliberate, calm movement. Several people glanced at him as he passed, that nagging feeling of recognition starting to stir, but not quite clicking yet. Tyler was still looking at his phone when Keanu reached the counter. Margaret was on stack number 3, concentrating so hard on counting that she didn't notice him either. Keanu stood there for a moment, taking in the full scene. The elderly woman with her trembling hands and downcast eyes, the pile of coins, the impatient employee with his phone, the line of people behind her, some uncomfortable, some annoyed, all witnessing a small tragedy of human dignity being eroded one sarcastic comment at a time. He thought about his own mother, who had passed away years ago. She would have been about this woman's age now. He thought about all the times he'd seen people dismissed, diminished, treated as less than human because they didn't fit someone's idea of what a customer should be. He thought about how easy it was to be cruel when you had a little bit of power over someone who had none. And then Keanu did what he'd come to do. He cleared his throat, calm but clear enough to get attention. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but carrying an edge that made Tyler's head snap up from his phone. "Is there a problem here?" Tyler looked up from his phone, ready to dismiss whoever was interrupting his already terrible day. But something about the man standing there made him pause. There was a quality to his voice, a steadiness that suggested this wasn't someone who was going to be easily brushed aside. "No problem," Tyler said, forcing what he thought was a professional smile. "Just waiting for this customer to finish paying. Taking a while, that's all." Keanu didn't smile back. He glanced at Margaret, who had stopped counting and was looking between the two of them with confusion and growing embarrassment. Then he looked back at Tyler, and even through the sunglasses, Tyler could feel the weight of his gaze. "It doesn't look like nothing," Keanu said calmly. "It looks like you're giving this lady a hard time." "I'm not giving anyone a hard time," Tyler said, his voice rising slightly in defense. "I'm just trying to keep the line moving. She's paying with like $100 in change. That's going to take forever." Margaret's face flushed deeper. She wanted to disappear. Having one person criticize her was bad enough. Now there was someone else paying attention, another witness to her humiliation. She started to gather up her coins, her hands shaking so badly that several quarters spilled onto the floor again. "It's okay," she whispered, not looking at either of them. "I'll just come back another time." "I'm sorry for the trouble," but Keanu had already moved. Before anyone could react, he bent down smoothly and started picking up the fallen coins. He got down on one knee right there on the pharmacy floor, collecting quarters and dimes with the same care and attention he'd give to anything else. The people in line stared. This was unexpected. Who was this guy? And why was he down on the floor picking up an old lady's change? Margaret looked down at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, you don't have to do that," she said quickly. "Please, I can get them." "I know you can," Keanu said, looking up at her with a kind smile that she couldn't quite see behind the sunglasses but could somehow feel anyway. "But I'm already down here, so I might as well help." He gathered the coins into his palm and stood back up, placing them gently on the counter next to Margaret's sorted piles. That's when his cap shifted slightly, and the woman who'd been third in line caught a glimpse of his face. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she whispered to the person next to her. "Is that who I think it is?" But Keanu wasn't paying attention to the whispers starting to ripple through the line. He was focused on Tyler, who had gone very still behind the counter. There was something about the way this stranger was looking at him that made Tyler deeply uncomfortable. Like he could see right through him. "I see a woman trying to pay for her medication," Keanu said, his voice still calm but with steel underneath. "That's not a problem. That's someone taking care of their health. The problem is how she's being treated while doing it." Tyler felt his face getting hot. Rosa, the other pharmacy employee, had stopped even pretending to work and was watching with wide eyes. Look, man, I don't know who you are, but I'm just doing my job. It's not my fault if people don't have their payment ready properly. Her payment is ready, Keanu said, gesturing to the coins on the counter. It's just in a form you've decided isn't convenient for you. But money is money. And more than that, people are people. They deserve respect regardless of how they pay. Someone in line started clapping. Just one person at first, then another. The woman who'd recognized Keanu pulled out her phone and started recording, though she was shaking so badly with excitement that the video was probably going to be unwatchable. Tyler's face went from red to pale in an instant. More people were pulling out phones now. This was getting out of control. And why did this guy look so familiar? Then it hit him. The profile, the voice, the way he moved. No way. Are you... Tyler started to say, but Keanu cut him off. What matters is that you apologize to this lady, Keanu said firmly. She hasn't done anything wrong. She came here to get medicine she needs. She has money to pay for it. The fact that it's in coins doesn't make her any less of a customer or any less of a person. Margaret had tears running down her face now, but they were different than the tears she'd been fighting earlier. These weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of being seen as human after feeling invisible. Thank you, she said softly to Keanu. You didn't have to do this. Keanu turned to her, and his expression softened completely. Yes, I did, he said simply. Then he looked back at Tyler. So? Tyler knew he was cornered. Every instinct told him to double down, to defend himself, to explain that he'd just been having a bad day and this wasn't who he really was. But looking at the elderly woman's tear-stained face, at the phones recording him, at this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere to defend her, Tyler felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Real shame. Not the kind you feel when you get caught doing something wrong. The kind you feel when you realize you've become someone you don't recognize. I'm sorry, he said to Margaret, and to his surprise, he actually meant it. That was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I'm having a bad day, but that's not your fault, and I took it out on you. I'm really sorry. Margaret nodded, accepting the apology with grace that Tyler didn't deserve. It's okay, she said quietly. We all have bad days. But Keanu wasn't quite finished. How much is her prescription? He asked. Tyler looked at his screen. $47.83. Without hesitation, Keanu pulled out his wallet. He slid a credit card across the counter to Tyler. Put it on this. No, Margaret said immediately, reaching out to touch his arm. No, you've done enough. I can pay. I have the money right here. Keanu looked at her with such genuine kindness that it made her heart ache. I know you can pay, he said gently. But I'd like to help, please. It would make me happy to do this. Margaret looked at this stranger who'd appeared like some kind of guardian angel, and she didn't know what to say. She'd spent her whole life being independent, never accepting charity, always paying her own way. But there was something about the way he was looking at her. Not with pity, with respect, like he genuinely wanted to do this for her. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Tyler processed the transaction with shaking hands. The card went through. He handed the receipt to Keanu and started to hand him back his card when Keanu stopped him. I'd like to speak with your manager, Keanu said. Tyler's blood ran cold. That's really not necessary, he said quickly. I apologized. I learned my lesson, please. The woman who'd been recording called out from the line, His name is Tyler Morrison. It's on his name tag. We all saw what he did. Other people in line nodded and murmured in agreement. Several of them had their phones out now, documenting everything. Tyler could see his life imploding in real time. This was going to be all over social media. He was going to lose his job. Maybe worse. But Keanu's expression wasn't vindictive. He looked at Tyler with something that might have been understanding mixed with disappointment. I'm not trying to get you fired, he said. But someone needs to know that this happened. Not to punish you, but because maybe this store needs better training on how to treat customers, especially vulnerable ones. At that moment, Patricia, the store manager, came rushing out of her office. She'd heard the commotion and had no idea what was going on, but she could see the crowd of people with phones out and the tension at the pharmacy counter, and she knew it was bad. What's going on here? She demanded, looking between Tyler, Margaret, and Keanu. The woman with the phone spoke up. Your employee was being incredibly rude to this elderly woman for paying with coins. This gentleman intervened. Patricia's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, realization, horror. She looked at Tyler, who couldn't meet her eyes. She looked at Margaret, who was clutching her prescription bag. And then she looked at Keanu, really looked at him, and recognized him instantly. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Mr. Reeves, I am so sorry. Whatever happened, I can assure you we'll handle it. Tyler, my office now." But Keanu held up a hand. "The apology shouldn't be to me," he said. "It should be to her." He gestured to Margaret. "I just happened to be here. She's the one who was mistreated." Patricia turned to Margaret, and her expression shifted from damage control mode to genuine concern. "Ma'am, I am deeply sorry for how you were treated. This is absolutely not how we train our employees to behave. I promise you this will be addressed." Margaret just nodded, overwhelmed by all the attention. She wanted to go home now, to process everything that had just happened in the quiet of her own apartment. Keanu seemed to sense this. "Is there anything else you need from the store?" he asked Margaret gently. "No," she said. "Just to leave if that's okay." "Can I walk you out?" Keanu offered. Margaret looked up at this kind stranger and nodded. She gathered her purse, leaving the coins on the counter. She didn't need them anymore. Keanu offered her his arm, and she took it gratefully, surprised by how steady he was, how solid. They walked together toward the exit while the entire store watched in stunned silence. The automatic doors slid open, and Margaret felt the cool afternoon air on her face. It felt like freedom, like waking up from a nightmare. She could still hear the murmur of voices inside the pharmacy, the clicking of phone cameras, the buzz of excitement. But out here it was quieter. Just the two of them in the parking lot stretching out ahead. Keanu guided her gently toward a bench near the entrance. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" he asked. That was probably pretty overwhelming. Margaret nodded and lowered herself onto the bench with relief. Her legs were shaking, though whether from the confrontation or just her age she couldn't tell. Keanu sat down beside her, giving her space but staying close enough that she knew he wasn't in a hurry to leave. For a minute, neither of them spoke. Inside the store, they could see Patricia gesturing animatedly, clearly giving Tyler an earful. Other customers were still clustered around the pharmacy counter, phones out, probably already posting videos online with captions about what they'd just witnessed. "I don't understand why you did that," Margaret finally said, turning to look at him. "You don't even know me." Keanu had taken off his sunglasses and she could see his eyes now. They were kind eyes, she thought. Tired, maybe. Like someone who'd seen a lot of the world, but still kind. "I don't need to know you," he said simply. What was happening wasn't right. "Sometimes you just have to step in." "Most people don't," Margaret said softly. "Step in, I mean. Most people just watch." "I know," Keanu said. "And I'm not saying I'm special for doing it. I'm saying maybe more people should." Margaret felt fresh tears welling up, but she wiped them away quickly. "I'm not usually like this," she said, embarrassed. "Crying in public. I used to be so much stronger." "You are strong," Keanu said firmly. "Coming in there, dealing with what you had to deal with, keeping your dignity even when someone was trying to take it from you. That takes incredible strength." "I just wanted my medicine," Margaret said. Her voice cracked slightly. "I taught school for 37 years. I was never rich, but I always had enough. And now?" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Now I count coins to afford my prescriptions. My husband would be so disappointed in me." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Why would he be disappointed?" "Because I can't take care of myself properly anymore. Because I end up in situations like that, causing problems, holding up lines." "You didn't cause any problems," Keanu said, his voice gentle but insistent. "You came to a store to buy something you needed, and you had money to pay for it. The problem was how you were treated, not what you did. And as for your husband, I bet he'd be proud of you. Proud that you're still fighting. Still taking care of yourself, still getting up every day and doing what needs to be done. That's not weakness. That's the opposite of weakness." Margaret looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. "You're a very kind person," she said. "Your mother raised you well." Something flickered across Keanu's face at the mention of his mother. Sadness, maybe. Love, definitely. "She did her best," he said quietly. "She taught me that how you treat people matters, especially people who are vulnerable or having a hard time. Those are the moments that show who you really are." They sat in comfortable silence for another moment. Inside the store, Patricia had ushered Tyler into her office. The crowd was dispersing, though several people kept glancing out the window at the bench where Keanu and Margaret sat. "I should get home," Margaret said, though she didn't move to stand up yet. "I live about 3 blocks from here. It's not far. Let me give you a ride," Keanu said immediately. "I've got my motorcycle around back." Margaret laughed, a real laugh that surprised even her. "A motorcycle? I haven't been on a motorcycle in 40 years. Robert had one when we were dating. Scared me half to death every time." "I've got a car too," Keanu said with a smile. "Parked around the corner. Much less scary. I promise I drive very carefully." Margaret hesitated. She'd been raised not to accept rides from strangers, even famous ones. But somehow this didn't feel like accepting something from a stranger. It felt like accepting help from a friend. "Okay," she said. "Thank you. That would be nice. My knees aren't what they used to be." Keanu stood and offered her his arm again. They walked slowly around the building to where his car was parked. It was nice but not ostentatious, clean and well-maintained. He opened the passenger door for her and helped her settle in before walking around to the driver's side. As he started the car, Margaret gave him directions to her apartment building. It really was only a few blocks away. The drive would take less than 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes felt important somehow, like a small pocket of peace after a storm. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said as they pulled out of the parking lot. "Of course. Why were you in that pharmacy? I mean, you could probably shop anywhere. Why there?" Keanu glanced at her with a slight smile. "Because it's usually quiet. And because I like feeling normal sometimes. Just a regular person picking up vitamins and going about my day. No fuss, no cameras, no expectations. Just being." "That must be hard," Margaret said thoughtfully. "Being famous, I mean. Never getting to just be yourself." "It has its challenges," Keanu admitted. "But I'm not complaining. I've been very lucky in my life. And honestly, moments like today remind me that fame can be useful. That young man in there wouldn't have listened to just anyone. But because people know who I am, I could make him listen. Make him see what he was doing. That's not nothing." They turned onto Margaret Street, a quiet residential block with old apartment buildings and mature trees. She pointed to a brick building halfway down. "That's mine. The one with the blue door." Keanu pulled up in front and put the car in park, but he didn't immediately move to let her out. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Margaret watched with growing alarm as he took out several bills. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I want you to have this," Keanu said, offering her the money. "For groceries. For whatever you need." "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly, her teacher voice coming back. "You already paid for my prescription. That was more than enough. I won't take your money. Please," Keanu said. "It would really make me feel better. And before you say no again, just think about this. I have more than I'll ever need. More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And you need help. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it. In fact, accepting help gracefully is its own kind of strength." Margaret looked at the money in his hand, then at his face. She could see he genuinely wanted to do this. Not to make himself feel superior. Not for thanks or recognition. Just because he could help and wanted to. "How much is there?" she asked quietly. $500. Margaret's eyes widened. That was more than she spent on groceries in 2 months. "That's too much." "It's exactly right," Keanu said. "Please, for me. You'd be doing me a favor by taking it." Margaret felt herself weakening. The truth was she needed it. She needed it desperately. Her savings were almost gone. She'd been skipping meals sometimes to make sure she could afford her medications. $500 would change everything for her, at least for a little while. "Thank you," she finally whispered, taking the money with trembling hands. "I don't know what else to say except thank you." "You don't have to say anything else," Keanu said. "Just promise me you'll use it for yourself. Buy good food. Maybe a warm coat for winter. Whatever you need." Margaret nodded, folding the bills carefully and putting them in her purse. She had to wipe her eyes again. "You know," she said, "I'm going to tell everyone about this. My church group, my neighbors, everyone. Not about the money, but about how a kind man stood up for me when no one else would. About how he reminded me that I'm still worth something." "You were always worth something," Keanu said. "What happened today doesn't change your worth. It just revealed other people's character." They sat for another moment in comfortable silence. Finally, Margaret opened her door and started to get out. Keanu came around to help her, making sure she was steady on her feet. "Will you be okay from here?" he asked. looking at the steps leading to her building's entrance. "I'll be fine," Margaret said. "I do this every day, usually without a movie star helping me." She smiled at him, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "Thank you for everything. You have no idea what this meant to me." "I think I do," Keanu said softly. They said their goodbyes, and Keanu waited until she'd made it safely inside the building before getting back in his car. As he drove away, he thought about Tyler, about Margaret, about all the small cruelties that happened every day when people forgot to see each other as human beings. Back at the pharmacy, Tyler sat in Patricia's office, his head in his hands. He'd been officially written up. One more incident like this and he'd be fired. But worse than the write-up was the way Patricia had looked at him. Disappointed. Disgusted even. "I don't understand what happened to you," Patricia had said. "You used to be one of my best employees. Friendly, helpful, patient. And now this? Embarrassing an elderly woman in front of the whole store?" Tyler couldn't explain it. He didn't understand it himself. When had he become the kind of person who kicked people when they were down? When had he become so bitter, so mean? The video was already circulating online. Keanu Reeves defends elderly woman at pharmacy. It had thousands of views already, growing by the minute. People were praising Keanu and condemning Tyler. His name was out there now. Tyler Morrison, the pharmacy employee who made fun of an old woman for paying with coins. He was going to have to live with this. Not just the professional consequences, but the knowledge of what he'd done, of who he'd been in that moment. And somehow, knowing that Keanu Reeves had witnessed it, had stood up to him, made it worse. Because Keanu hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. He'd just been calm and firm and right. And that was harder to dismiss than anger would have been. Tyler sat in that office for a long time after Patricia left, thinking about the man he'd become and the man he used to be, and wondering if there was any way back. 3 weeks had passed since that Tuesday afternoon at the CVS. The video had gone viral, reaching millions of views across multiple platforms. News outlets had picked up the story. Think pieces had been written about customer service, about treating elderly people with dignity, about what it means to be kind in a world that often rewards cruelty. Tyler had watched his life change in real time. The first few days had been brutal. His phone had exploded with messages from old friends, family members, even people he barely knew from high school. Some were sympathetic. Most were not. He'd been recognized twice at the grocery store, and both times people had given him disgusted looks and walked away. He'd considered quitting his job, starting over somewhere new where no one knew his face, but Patricia had called him into her office on the third day and made him an offer he hadn't expected. "I'm not going to fire you," she'd said, "but things are going to change. You're going to complete a customer service training program. You're going to volunteer at the senior center 2 Saturdays a month, and you're going to think very carefully about the kind of person you want to be." Tyler had agreed immediately, not because he was trying to save his job, though that was part of it, but because late at night when he couldn't sleep, he kept seeing Margaret's face, the way her hands had shaken, the tears she'd tried so hard to hide, the shame in her eyes. He'd done that to her. Him. And he couldn't undo it, but maybe he could make sure he never did it again. The customer service training had been humbling, role-playing scenarios where he had to practice patience and empathy, learning about the challenges faced by elderly customers, people with disabilities, those living in poverty. It had forced him to see the world through eyes other than his own, but the real change had come from the senior center. The first Saturday he'd shown up, he'd been terrified. He was sure everyone had seen the video. Sure they'd hate him, and maybe some of them did, but his supervisor, an older woman named Beverly, had just put him to work helping prepare lunch. "We all make mistakes," she'd said simply. "What matters is what you do after." Over the past 3 weeks, Tyler had met dozens of elderly people at the center. He'd heard their stories. He'd learned about their lives, their struggles, their dignity maintained despite circumstances that would have broken lesser people. He'd met veterans who'd served their country and now lived on meager pensions. Former teachers like Margaret, who'd given everything to their students and had little left for themselves. Widows and widowers still grieving spouses lost decades ago. And slowly, something had shifted inside him. The bitterness that had been building for years started to crack. He began to see his own problems differently. Yes, he was stuck in a job he didn't love. Yes, money was tight. Yes, his life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned, but he had his health. He had time. He had options. So many of the people he met at the center would have given anything to be in his position. Now, on this particular Tuesday afternoon, Tyler was back at the pharmacy counter. Same spot where it had all happened, but he was different. The line was long again, just like that day 3 weeks ago. But Tyler was patient. When an older man needed help reading the fine print on his prescription bottle, Tyler took the time to read it to him clearly. When a woman fumbled with her credit card, struggling to get it into the chip reader, Tyler waited patiently and even showed her how to use the contactless payment instead. And then she walked in. Margaret. Tyler saw her the moment she came through the door. She looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure she wanted to be there. She got in line and Tyler felt his heart start to pound. He hadn't seen her since that day. Hadn't had a chance to apologize properly. Not the forced apology he'd given when Keanu was standing there, but a real one. The line moved slowly. Tyler helped each customer with genuine attention and care. And finally, Margaret was next. She approached the counter cautiously, recognition dawning in her eyes when she saw him. "Hello," Tyler said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here to help you today." Margaret looked at him warily. "I need to pick up my prescription." "Margaret Chen, of course. Just one moment." Tyler turned to find her prescription, his hands surprisingly steady. He found it and scanned it into the system. "That'll be $47.83. Margaret reached into her purse and Tyler saw her pull out her wallet. She had bills this time, he noticed. She counted out $50 and handed it to him. As he made change, Tyler took a deep breath. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the one I gave you before because I had to. What I did that day was cruel and wrong. I was frustrated about my own life and I took it out on you, and there's no excuse for that. I've thought about it every day since. About how I made you feel. About the kind of person I was in that moment. And I'm truly, deeply sorry." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Tyler couldn't read her expression. Then slowly she nodded. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "It takes courage to apologize." "I've been volunteering at the senior center," Tyler continued, "and doing training. Trying to be better. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure I never do it again." "That's good," Margaret said. "That's very good." Tyler handed her the change and her prescription. "I hope you're doing well, Mrs. Chen, and again, I'm sorry." Margaret took her items and gave him a small smile. "We all deserve a second chance," she said. "I think you're using yours wisely." As she walked away, Tyler felt a weight lift that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was something better. It was acknowledgement that he was trying, that he was different now. Margaret left the pharmacy and walked the 3 blocks to her apartment. The walk was easier these days. She'd bought herself proper walking shoes with some of the money Keanu had given her. She'd also stocked her pantry, bought a new winter coat, and even treated herself to a few books from the library's used book sale. But more than that, she felt different, lighter. That day at the pharmacy had been terrible, yes, but what had come after had reminded her that there was still kindness in the world. Still people who would stand up for what was right. Still hope. She'd told the story to everyone, just as she'd promised Keanu she would. At her church group, the ladies had cried and praised God for sending an angel. At the senior center, people had marveled and asked questions. Had he really been that kind? That humble? Yes, she'd assured them. He'd treated her like she mattered, like she was worth his time and attention. The video had made its way to her as well. One of her former students, now in her 50s, had found her on Facebook and sent her the link. Margaret had watched it once, seeing herself from the outside, seeing how small and defeated she'd looked. Seeing Keanu step in without hesitation, seeing the transformation in the store as people realized what was happening. She hadn't watched it again. She didn't need to. She had lived it, and that was enough. Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the city, Keanu was having coffee with an old friend. They'd been talking about work, about projects, about the normal things people talk about. But his friend had brought up the video. "That thing at the pharmacy went everywhere," his friend said. "You've probably seen the numbers." "I don't really pay attention to that stuff," Keanu said, which was mostly true. "It's got like 50 million views across all platforms. People are calling you a hero." Keanu shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone should do." The real story isn't me. It's her, Mrs. Chen. She's the one who faced that situation with grace. She's the one who's been dealing with challenges I can't even imagine. I just had a few minutes of my day. She has to live her whole life. Still, his friend insisted. It mattered. You changed something for her. You probably changed something for that employee too. Keanu thought about that. I hope so, he said finally. I hope he learns from it. That's what mistakes are for, right? Learning. 6 months later, Tyler was still at the pharmacy, but he'd also started taking classes at night, finishing the degree he'd abandoned years ago. He had goals now, plans. He wanted to become a pharmacist himself, not just a technician. He wanted to run his own pharmacy someday, the kind where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. He still volunteered at the senior center every other Saturday. He'd become close with several of the regulars there. They told him their stories, and he listened. Really listened. They'd taught him more about life than any classroom ever had. One Saturday, Beverly pulled him aside. "You know," she said, "when you first started here, I had my doubts. I'd seen the video. I thought you might just be here because you had to be. But you're not, are you? You actually care now." Tyler thought about that. "I do," he said. "I didn't at first, maybe, but somewhere along the way it became real. These people, they matter to me now. Their stories matter. Their dignity matters." Beverly patted his arm. "That's growth," she said. "Be proud of that." Margaret still went to that CVS. She'd considered going to a different one, but she'd decided that would be running away. And she was tired of running. Besides, Tyler was different now. Everyone at the pharmacy was different, actually. Whether because of what had happened or because Patricia had cracked down on customer service, Margaret didn't know. But people were kinder, more patient, more present. She'd never heard from Keanu again. She didn't expect to. He'd been a moment in her life, a crucial one, but just a moment. Still, she thought about him sometimes. Wondered if he knew how much that day had meant to her. Not just the money, though, that had been life-changing, but the simple act of being seen, of being defended, of being reminded that she was still a person worthy of respect. One evening, Margaret sat down to write a letter. She didn't know if it would ever reach him, but she needed to write it anyway. She needed to put into words what that day had meant. "Dear Mr. Reeves," she wrote in her careful cursive, "you probably don't remember me. I'm the woman from the pharmacy 6 months ago. I wanted you to know that the kindness you showed me that day changed my life. Not just because of your generosity, though that helped more than you know, but because you reminded me that I'm still here, still valuable, still deserving of dignity. I'm 78 years old and sometimes I feel invisible. But you saw me, and in seeing me, you helped me see myself again. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to say thank you, not just for what you did, but for who you are. The world needs more people like you. I'm trying to be more like you myself, standing up when I see something wrong, speaking out when I see injustice. You taught me that I still have a voice. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. With deep gratitude, Margaret Chen." She sealed the letter and addressed it to his talent agency, the only address she could find online.